There was a day silent, stifled, almost forgotten by time when the bells of the Vatican rang. But not to announce a feast, nor to mourn a death. They rang with hesitation. A strange sound, almost indecipherable. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't lament. It was something else. As if an ancient secret were about to be revealed. That morning, Pope Leo XIV appeared before the assembled cardinals. But he was not dressed in white. He wore gray. A small gesture, but enough for the most attentive eyes to notice. Something unusual was about to happen, and then, without warning, without protocol, without applause or formal speeches, the Pope pronounced the name Fridolin Ambongo Besungu. For a moment, there was total silence. Some smiled, others looked away. Most did not understand, but Leo XIV knew exactly what he was doing. It was not just an appointment. It was a rupture, a spark thrown into the heart of the church, a gesture that would bring discomfort to many, and consolation to a few, because Fridolin Ambongo Besungu, the Congolese cardinal, was not just a symbol of an emerging Africa. He was a man marked by allegations of injustice, ambiguous positions, alliances difficult to explain, and even so, he was called. Called not for punishment, but for the altar, called not to answer but to listen. Leo XIV did not expose him, nor did he defend him. He simply placed him in the light. It is said that ancient monks could recognize when a brother was in shadow, and so they would place him beneath the most colorful stained glass window in the chapel. There, the light would do what judgments could not, and that is what the Pope did with Ambongo. He did not punish him, but neither did he shield him. He made him visible, and that was the most surprising decision. Because to make someone visible is to place him before the mirror. It is to allow everyone to see, including himself, where glory begins, and where pride ends. The next day, Ambongo was seen in silence, kneeling before the image of Saint Benedict. There were no photographers, no reporters, only him, and a reflection. A man not broken but disarmed, not humiliated but reduced to his essence. And perhaps for the first time in a long time, he was not trying to be someone, he was simply standing before someone. The Pope's decision was not understood by all, and perhaps it shouldn't be, because the Church, when it walks in, truth does not need to justify itself, it simply walks. And along this walk there are moments when even mistakes are called to serve the good, not out of naivety, but out of courage, the courage to believe that even a divided heart can one day be made whole. Leo XIV did not elevate Ambongo, but neither did he destroy him. He handed him over to his own conscience, and to the mercy of God, because there are decisions that do not shine in headlines, but echo in and there are scandals that can be healed with a single gesture, to be seen, and not to run away. While Rome questioned the reason behind the choice, Leo XIV remained silent. But it was not a silence of omission, it was a pedagogical silence, like a teacher who delivers the lesson, without explaining. Because some truths are not learned through arguments but through time. In the inner halls, it was said the Pope had received contrary advice. Some called for Ambongo's removal, others for his excommunication. But Leo XIV responded with a single sentence: man's justice punishes, God's justice converts. Then something even more unexpected happened. The Pope invited Ambongo to a silent vigil in the crypt of St. Peter. No cameras were allowed, no aides could enter, only the Pope and the Cardinal outside. Swiss guards reported the vigil lasted 7 hours, without words, without chants, without public liturgy, just 2 men, and the invisible presence of the crucified. When they emerged, Ambongo was pale, but his eyes had changed. They did not seem defeated, but awakened, as if for the first time, he understood that the dignity of a cardinal lies not in the red of his robe, but in the blood of a heart, willing to change. And that is the true revolution of Leo XIV. He is not merely reforming structures, he is reforming consciences. He is reminding the Church and the world that the greatest scandal is not sin, but the pride that refuses to acknowledge it. Since that night, internal sources have reported changes in Ambongo's behavior. He allegedly asked to step down from certain administrative functions. He requested spiritual guidance from a Benedictine monk, and he declined the use of personal security for public visits. If I am to be attacked, let it be without protection, he supposedly said. If I am to be forgiven, let it be without disguise. That phrase, though simple, has quietly circulated among young priests, because it carries something sorely missing in many theological discourses: raw truth, vulnerability, conversion. Leo XIV is not raising up heroes, he is raising up penitents. And by choosing not to publicly destroy a cardinal in crisis, the Pope did not weaken the Church, he strengthened it from within. Because only those who descend to the ruins can rebuild with authenticity, and perhaps that is why the world is so shocked, not because he named Ambongo, but because he dared to treat him as a man still worthy of being saved. In the weeks that followed the secret vigil, something strange began to unfold behind the scenes of the Church. There were no decrees, no reforms announced, but silently, a new language began to circulate through the corridors of the Vatican. It was not made of words, but of more attentive glances, of slower footsteps, of less arrogant voices. It was as if the gesture of Leo XIV in refusing to publicly punish a wounded man had quietly liberated many others from the invisible prison of vanity and fear. Priests began confessing to one another in private, without being asked. Bishops started visiting contemplative monasteries without agenda, without press, simply to listen. And for the first time in decades, there were rumors of cardinals writing letters of resignation not because of scandal, but because of humility. The gesture toward Ambongo had touched a collective wound, an ancient wound, hidden beneath layers of theology, politics, and appearances. And Leo XIV, with a simple gesture, seemed to say, the Church does not need to be saved from the weakness of its men. It needs to be saved from their hypocrisy. By refusing the logic of public stoning and choosing the pedagogy of mercy, the Pope had struck the deepest blow against clericalism. He revealed that spiritual authority is not about punishment, but about regeneration. Some resisted. They called his attitude naive, even dangerous. Others accused him of weakness, of moral relativism. But the saints, those who lived behind the scenes of the world, understood what was happening, and they began to pray for Ambongo. They began to fast for him. They began to ask God that his heart be restored, not by force, but by love, because in the end, the greatest revolution doesn't happen in palaces, but in hearts that return to the rhythm of the gospel. And when Leo XIV looked upon Ambongo with mercy, he was, in truth, looking at each of us, showing that no matter how far we've fallen, grace can still lift us up if only we allow ourselves to be found. Days later, a letter quietly arrived at the apostolic residence. It did not come in an official envelope. It bore no coat of arms, but the handwriting was steady, confessional, almost trembling. It was signed by him, Fridolin Ambongo. The letter said few words, but every phrase seemed written with blood and repentance. Holiness, you saw me, not as an enemy, not as a symbol, but as a man who got lost in the maze, and who, instead of being crushed by yet another closed door, found an open window. Your mercy shames me, and at the same time calls me back. If it's still possible, I wish to begin again, without a pulpit, without honor, only with the cross. Leo XIV read the letter in silence. Then, he walked to the balcony where so many times Benedict XVI and John Paul II had waved to the crowds, but there was no crowd, no journalists, no cheers. Only the Roman breeze, and the distant sound of bells. There, they say he closed his eyes and whispered words no one could record. Perhaps a prayer, perhaps a plea, because when a man returns through repentance, all of heaven falls silent to listen. And it was in that silence that Ambongo disappeared. Not from the headlines, but from the system. He withdrew, requested a transfer to a forgotten diocese in Africa, far from everything, from everyone, and there, slowly, he began to rebuild, not his image but his soul. Some say he now celebrates Mass beneath trees, that he carries his own vestments, that he cleans the floor of the small chapel where he serves. Others claim he has become a confessor for other fallen priests, not to judge, but to remind them that no one is irredeemably lost. Leo XIV never spoke publicly about it. He never defended his decision. He never justified anything, because true love does not justify itself. It simply acts and waits and believes. This was not a story of scandal, nor of heroism. It was a story of someone who fell, and of another who wasn't afraid to kneel down and help him rise, even if it cost his own reputation. And maybe that's the only kind of authority. The world can still believe in the authority of the one who bends down. Days after Ambongo's quiet departure into anonymity, a young French priest unknown to the public wrote something in his private journal that would quietly stir the entire underground clergy, that hidden part of the church which does not appear on stages but sustains the altar through sacrifice. He wrote, "Today I heard the confession of a bishop. He wept like a child. He didn't ask forgiveness for public scandals, but for abandoning silent prayer in the midst of fame. He said he didn't lose his faith, he lost his ability to listen." This journal was never published, but like all gestures born from the Spirit, it began to circulate hand to hand, heart to heart. And eventually, the echoes of this testimony reached Pope Leo XIV. He did not respond with words, but on the following Sunday, during Mass at the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, he did something unexpected. He stepped down from the high altar and walked all the way to the last pew, the one no one sits in. There, he knelt and remained still. For nearly 20 minutes, no mitre, no crozier, no bodyguards. The people watched, confused but slowly. Some began to follow, priests, nuns, pilgrims. They started leaving their places, kneeling in the aisles, in the corners, on the steps. The altar disappeared, and the entire church became one floor for anyone who wished to begin again. That day, no homily was preached, no readings were proclaimed, but the whole world understood the message. The church is not the place for the perfect, it is the place for those who keep coming back. And when Leo XIV finally rose, he simply said, "We are all confessing something, even in silence." This video ends here, but the gesture continues to echo. Perhaps you felt it, not in arguments, but in the pause, in the lump in your throat, in that forgotten memory that God still speaks. And sometimes, He says more with silence than with any encyclical. If this message stirred something within you, share this video with someone else who needs to return. Return without shame. Return without masks. Return to the invisible altar where the soul is cleansed by grace, not appearance. Write in the comments, "I knelt with Leo XIV." And if you can, turn off your phone for a few minutes. Sit in silence. Perhaps God is waiting for just that, a space where he can speak. And never forget, it will not be the powerful who sustain the church, it will be the repentant and the brave enough to love, even while bleeding. May the peace of this gesture reach your heart, and may the invisible altar remain lit within you.